Quick trigger warning, just because this is my life now. There is a brief discussion of animals in a slaughterhouse with Matthew during this, and I will have the timestamps of when that discussion starts and when it ends in the description. If that's too much for you, feel free to skip ahead once you hit the timestamp. Hi, I'm Keegan, and this is A Bunch of Gamers. Welcome back to GM Talks, and I am joined by Matthew Dawkins, the gentleman gamer himself. Welcome.
Hello. Hello, Keegan. Not the first time we have spent some quality time together.
No, I think you are officially the most reoccurring person with this podcast. I think 3 times now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that makes me any kind of whore, but I am very easy.
Fantastic.
You don't have to pay me for my time.
Well, I mean, I've had other ideas like having Josh Heath crash Eddie's interview about Pugmire so that Eddie could go, "Hey, where's my board game, Josh?"
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we're here to talk about Curseborne. I've already asked some interesting questions, but you put up a video on your channel at time of recording recently, probably a month ago at time of release, about the Get of Fenris and the Get of Lycan, and how you pulled some inspiration from like Werewolf the Apocalypse and things like that. And what kind of homages did you really pull, like that really stick out to you for the Get of Lycan?
Well, it's less about pulling material from the existing Werewolf the Apocalypse game and more about pulling inspiration from how I run it. I think that's... you know that I run a lot of games, and so I often run World of Darkness games for predictable reasons. And one of the things I spoke about in that video is the idea of all the tribes, when I run them, have a form of righteous anger. And the Get of Fenris in Werewolf, I like to think that they have the righteous anger of the warrior. They are essentially, to really reduce them to one kernel of an idea, in my games they are the tribe of almost PTSD. You could say the tribe of war. I kind of think of them as the tribe of veterans, well, if they even get that far, the tribe that is destined to die on the thorns of the worm because they go first. They are the only ones brave enough, bold enough, dangerous enough to face the enemy head on. And they probably inherited that mantle from the White Howlers. They were probably something far more spiritual, more stoic at the time when the Aesir were dominant, and when the White Howlers fell, someone else had to become the tribe of war. That's the Get of Fenris. That's what my Werewolf the Apocalypse is. Not headcanon, it's just the way I run my games and like to style the tribes. And as that route wasn't being pursued in Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition, I thought, well, I can put that righteous anger into the Get of Lyca, the Lycans in our Curseborne game. Now, they are by no means a mirror image of the Get of Fenris. In fact, the fact that they have the word Get in the name is just about the only tribute I'm making there. But the idea of a primal family having such a natural anger to them, fury that is almost storm-like. They have this elemental quality where the Get of Lyca are, I guess, possessed of a maelstrom, a tempest. They are strong advocates for what they believe in, what is right and what is wrong, and they will punish mercilessly those who they feel have wronged them, or more broadly, their entire lineage. So some of that is fairly archetypal from a werewolf standpoint. We have to have werewolves that are angry because that's what people expect from playing a werewolf. But tying it so closely to, I guess, things like storms, that idea of unbridled environmental rage, tying them to that idea of them being on the front line. They are the vanguard for the primal lineage. So when things start intruding from the outside into Curseborne, it's probably going to be the Get of Lyca and likely some outcasts who are up front trying to push it back because they are the only ones with the spine. Well, that's how they would style it. They are the ones who probably others feel are most suitable, and so I could very well see the Get of Leica harboring a bit of a chip on their shoulder for that, and I kind of saw the Get of Fenris as always having a bit of a chip on their shoulder for that as well. So long-winded answer because I don't give short answers, but there are some similarities, some crossover points there.
I'm sure. And so that brings another question to mind is how close are, we'll get into other families soon, but I am curious, how closely tied are they to the Greek king in mythology, or is it just pulling more from the name?
Oh, well, no, that's a good spot because not many people have asked about that. We haven't gone hugely into detail in every single family's origins on the core book because there's only so much space. We are giving the tools you need to play and I guess hints as to history. And yeah, you can find things like that in the naming of various families. The Get of Leica is one of them. So I can't confirm anything yet because it isn't written, but I can say you're definitely on the right track for when we start delving into the lineages a little more in future source books. I think, yeah, you'll be able to find that, the Lycan attachment there, Leica, is most certainly going to be a part of it. And there's another aspect. Ooh, should I reveal it? I see the Get of Leica having quite some proximity in the origins of their damnation to the dead, and that may seem like a strange link there, but not that it's all Greek. Don't get me wrong, but the dead damnation is said to come from lots of family heads, lots of very powerful people, a league of powerful people, essentially demanding immortality and other gifts from a powerful oracle, and putting her through such horrible treatment to extract from her the gifts they wanted. And of course, when they finally get these gifts, they are delivered on a cursed plate. And so, yeah, there's some Grecian stuff going on there. But yeah, I won't say anything more than that.
All right, yeah. Can't reveal secrets when the World Bible hasn't been finished yet, right?
No, but that's a very good point that you've made because yeah, no one else, at least as of time of recording, has even pointed out that Leica could mean anything other than lycanthrope. So yeah.
Well, I try. I told Danielle after our recording I like to ask oddball questions, or at least try to. And I jokingly told her, well, if I can't think of anything with Matthew, I'll just go, so what made you decide D10s?
Well, Shadowrun had the D6 market cornered, and,
Yeah,
And so far, there's no other games that use D10 dice pools.
That's true. But, so what families did you have a hand in, and which one really comes to mind when you try and pitch this game to maybe someone who... two questions in one, I should say. What family would you pitch for someone who's come in from like a World of Darkness or Chronicles of Darkness background, and someone who's maybe fresh to horror genre RPGs?
Ooh, okay. So, to start with, what I wrote... so I've had a fairly heavy hand in doing some things like rewrites and co-development with Danielle. So it's difficult to identify single bits and pieces, but I originally wrote all of the Dead lineage. And that was subsequently developed and reworked to one degree or other by Danielle, which is absolutely fine and was necessary. I then went into the Primal, and I did a fair amount of reworking there. I created some new families, adjusted some of the initial proposals. It was a pretty collaborative effort, this entire book. We've had several rafts of authors because we've wanted lots of ideas on the page. And then it's been up to Danielle, Eddie, myself, Dixie Cochran as well, to refine those ideas into what we wanted to see. And I suppose the family that I've worked on that I would most advertise to a fan of World of Darkness and Chronicles of Darkness, just to be contrary, is probably... I think I'd probably go for something like the Eight Hands, who are our were spiders or were arachnids. You could take it further and just have them as were bugs in general. Certainly in one of the actual plays I've been running, there's a centipedal Eight Hands, which I know sort of runs counter to the name, but ultimately it is just a name. They are bug-like, I suppose. And the reason I would suggest the Eight Hands as a contrary move is because while the Anastasi exist in Werewolf the Apocalypse, they are very different. And I love the idea of the Eight Hands. I love the idea of this cartel-like setup. I mean, the name itself, I think, is fantastic. It's got an air of Daredevil, Marvel gang to it, like the hand. But I think the idea of the Eight Hands, it gives you a certain image in your mind. And they are, of course, being bugs. They are creepy. They are predatory, but they're not the kind of predators who are just going to go charging after a victim. They are the ones who will lay in wait. They will lay traps, and then they will make your life a living suffering for having crossed them. And I think it would pose an interesting challenge because they have elements of the Nosferatu to them if you're a vampire fan. They have elements of the Bone Gnawers to them if you're a werewolf fan. They have an outcast, not with a capital O, flavour to them, which I think pulls from a lot of popular places in World and Chronicles of Darkness, but is no way the same as any of them. As for someone brand new to horror games, I think I would recommend one of the families I didn't write, because you can't really get much more, I guess, glam and archetypal than the Bathorites, House Bathory, for the Hungry. On the face of it, they are the archetypal vampire, these Hungry. They, of course, drink blood, but they also bathe in blood. They are, in a sense, new money in the Curseborne universe, because you have the heirs who can trace their families back generations upon generations. They may not be the same family as they were in previous iterations, but they will certainly style themselves as such. The Bathorites are more your, I guess, modern culture, that they are going to be riding the wave of whatever is popular right now. I suppose if you're a classic World of Darkness fan or a Chronicles of Darkness fan, you might compare the Bathorites to the Toreador or the Deva. I think the Bathorites have a slightly more, I guess I would call it, that they are sexier than the Toreador, so they are more Deva-like. But they're also depraved, like the Toreador Anti-Tribu, because they bathe in blood. So it gives you a lot of tools to play with, and if you're trying to get into a horror game, well, it is pretty disgusting bathing blood. Blood isn't as hot as it always looks in movies. Steam does not rise up from blood. It's pretty... Well, it's obviously body temperature, otherwise your veins would burn. So having a bath in blood is pretty disgusting, but it makes for a lovely horror image.
Sure. No, that makes
Not
sense.
speaking from experience, not much experience anyway.
No. I mean, I live on a weird makeshift homestead in the middle of the city, so I've had to deal with a little bit of blood, but no like bathing amounts.
No, you would need to kill a lot of people or animals to fill a bathtub.
Yes.
I think I may have mentioned on your podcast before how once upon a time I worked in an abattoir, and that's the closest I've come to bathing in blood. But not for pleasure. It was just a horrendous place to work, and there was a lot of hazing that took place on new trainees. And yeah, you can well imagine the sorts of horror stories that came out of a place like that. I didn't work there for long, as you might imagine.
Yeah,
Learn some valuable skills.
I'm sure. Maybe get some vivid descriptions for future games.
It's what got me hired on Cult Divinity Lost, that job. Because in a video I recorded many years ago, I was describing, I think the video was something like how to run a good horror game. It was something very generic like that. And I opened the video up by describing some kind of horror scene in an abattoir, and I just pulled it from my memory, more or less. And one of the developers of the new edition of Cult happened to watch the video and said, "Oh, we want to hire this guy." Didn't know I'd ever worked on anything else in terms of writing. So yeah, it's odd, what gets you work, but having been on a slaughterhouse floor got me hired for Cult, which is probably appropriate.
Sure. No, that makes sense. You live in my state of Colorado, or specifically Denver. Remember to vote to shut down our slaughterhouse.
Well, yes, of course, this will be going out before the vote, but very close.
Very close to it, yes. But
yeah. I can't recommend them. I mean, I'm not going to turn this episode into a anti-meat eating or pro-vegetarian. I'm a meat eater, but I am also crucially aware of the cruelty that goes into it, and so quite choosy about what I will eat.
Yes.
But yes, just to put everyone off their ham sandwiches right now, there is no ethical way of killing a living creature. If you are told that this one's really going in an odd direction. If you're told that a bolt gun to the brain is a instant death to an animal, you have been lied to.
Yep.
So take that away.
Yeah. I was going to say the only time I've ethically killed animals so far is disease. And
you're
right. But
you're right, but you wouldn't be eating that meat.
No. There are ways to give them good lives and do it, but no factory farms.
Well,
anyway,
Keegan,
my werewolf roots are coming. My werewolf roots are coming out.
Well, maybe we'll split this bit out into a different episode. But you and I have occasioned, I mean, only lightheartedly, to throw philosophical memes backwards and forwards at each other, and sometimes it goes into trolley problems and ethics and things like that. I think they're always very fun to discuss. And the idea of giving an animal, let's say a herd animal, a cow, let's say, the best possible life, letting it roam around a field, being cared for, not necessarily massaged, but milked regularly, but not too regularly, letting it live among its own kind for several years, and then giving it as rapid a death as possible, so that it's leather, so that its meat, so that its bones and so forth can be used for another purpose, is arguably more ethical than letting it live in the wild and succumb to some injury and die slowly and be devoured alive by foxes and wolves or whatever, depending on where your cow is kept. So it's an interesting conundrum, but certainly, yeah, the abattoir method is not all that fun or clean.
No.
So Curseborne.
Curseborne, yeah, no, we're good. We go on tangents, as everyone knows. Me and Eddie Webb talked about tabletop role-playing games being an oral tradition, not a written one.
Yeah. I mean, I probably wouldn't be able to discuss this kind of thing with Eddie. He is a lovely man and an animal lover, and I'm perfectly fine with animals. I don't hate them.
Sure.
And I apologize to your listenership for exposing them to my odd tangents.
No, I get it. Yeah, we'll do the X card on the rest of the animal discussion, and move on.
You might need it. Yeah.
But yeah, with Curseborne, I know everything's a curse, and that there's some minor stuff and there's some bigger stuff. Are there some kind of like ingrained curses besides the lineages that really jump to mind? Like maybe something that's because you've mentioned before that you like every paragraph, at least, if not every sentence, to have kind of a story hook for players and storytellers to latch onto. So what kind of curses beyond the lineages do you really like and do you think would be great for new players and story guides to sink their teeth into?
I think the easiest answer to that is the space you live in. I wrote all of the liminalities, all of the setting material for Curseborne, and it was heavily influenced, as far as I went. I didn't develop it, but as far as I went, by works like various books by Stephen King. among other authors, but Stephen King is a very good touchstone. And I use an example like Derry in It not because I think It is Stephen King's best novel, far from it, but I think Derry is a pretty archetypal location, which is cursed. It's cursed because of the presence of Pennywise, and yet Pennywise isn't the only threat, because everyone else in Derry has been contaminated with what Pennywise does. The forgetfulness, the abusiveness, the ability to turn a blind eye to rampant assaults and racism and sexism and everything else that happens in Derry. It makes for an excellent location that I think a lot of players can relate to, because almost everyone has either seen a version of It or read It by this point, I would say. That you can basically make a curse, and it doesn't have to be a supernatural family, but you can see it through the family you grew up with. All of a sudden, Dad started acting strange. Someone said it's because he bumped his head at work, but he started talking in his sleep. He started getting up at all hours of the night and walking out to the cow shed for some reason. No one knows why. The teacher was replaced one day. No one ever mentioned the previous teacher again. And the new teacher keeps staring at these two classmates, and then they maybe disappear, or they seem to change as well. You can explore these kinds of curses. They're not outward curses in the sense of a sorcerer has come to town and said, I curse you to do this, in a sort of Gaius kind of way. But it's a curse in the sense that your world is cursed, and you, as one of the accursed, are one of the very few people who are aware of it to the degree that you could probably alleviate some of that hell. And again, if we were to follow the It train of thought, it could come down to fighting a giant spider in the sewers, though I don't think that's a very satisfying conclusion. You can instead look at, to keep using Stephen King as an example, The Overlook Hotel. You can take the plot of one of his lesser-known, more recent books, The Outsider, which has a very outcast or outsider fae-like demon that's going around committing crimes by duplicating himself as someone else, down to the fingerprints. So someone else gets arrested for it, and then steadily changing his appearance to commit another crime as someone else and moving from town to town. All the way through to Needful Things, with Leland Gaunt opening up a store that curses people as soon as they enter and make a deal with him. That kind of curses in your geography, the small town atmosphere, where everyone knows each other and yet no one trusts each other, is something I love to play with I've ran a fair amount of Curseborne now, and it's something all the players really seem to jive with as well. It's that unsettling feeling of nothing is quite as it seems.
Excellent. So, because you've done a couple of games, I know that this game is still in development. What are some things you found and you really thought worked as tweaks after, initially playing it? What are some of the tweaks you suggested and added?
Yeah, well, I playtest pretty much everything I write extensively. I know not every game designer does. I don't do it to grandstand. I genuinely struggle to develop games if I haven't playtested them. Because I need to see what works, what falls off, what people don't engage with. I think that bit is the most important. Is there a power no one ever picked, for example? Or is there a power someone is always questioning, how does this work? The text isn't quite clear, that sort of thing. And I don't think you get that until you expose it to an audience. Now, with Curseborne, I think the thing I have found that's been most surprising to me is the ability for players to have a lot of almost camp fun with it, which isn't the necessarily the direction we intend. It is a horror game. It has dark humor. I think this is why sometimes we're calling it urban horror, sometimes we're calling it urban fantasy, because sometimes these can be Monster of the Week episodes. This could be your X-Files episode, The Host. This could be your X-Files episode, The Family, or no, it's just called Home, isn't it? In season 4, I want to say. But equally, it could be an episode like Clyde Bruckman's Final Repose, or one of these other more wacky X-Files episodes. And I found that players really love the idea of dysfunctional families from a scary viewpoint, as in it's the abusive uncle again, no one wants to hang around with him, through to fun, oh shit, let's avoid that creep, let's, get out of this party and skip over to that bar where we'll make some trouble. Or trying to humiliate members of your family so you can essentially rise up in the hierarchy. And it doesn't always have to be grotesque. You don't have to just gut the uncle because you don't like him. It can just be a case of finding another way to embarrass him. So one of the first recorded games of Curseborne I ran was set in a theatre where there was a curse in play. Someone in the audience had basically made a deal with a kind of demon so that the lead actress, one of our player characters, her accursed, her face would explode at a crucial moment in the play to humiliate her because she never gave this audience member, her number one fan, the attention he craved. Now, the curse goes wrong because she has to sign a contract, but her co-star puts his autograph over the top of it. And so it ends up with his face exploding over her. The play goes wrong. Now, this could be a horror story. It was certainly designed as one, trying to figure out how has this curse come into effect? How do we convince the audience this is all part of the show? That sort of thing, and who is the demon behind this, etc., etc. But it ended up being a game where you had a diva on stage who was constantly improvising and pissing off the scriptwriter and director, where you had a seamstress who was more worried about the imps running around backstage ruining the costumes than actually banishing them, and so forth. And it became a bit wacky, but it was still a horror game. So, yeah, my biggest takeaway is that people are engaging with this material in ways that I didn't expect them to. And that's excellent, to be honest. I like to see people do unexpected things with our games. It means I'm being surprised. And as a story guide, as a GM, I need to be surprised for it to be interesting for me when I'm running. I hate games that go exactly as I plan. They're just so dull.
Well, I completely understand that. I have noticed, with my players at least, like when the subject matter gets dark, that is when the jokes come in a little more frequently to kind of just add that levity. Shut up.
Yeah. You need a pressure valve for darkness in a game, and I think you can really break immersion on a horror game if there's too many jokes. Of course you can, or rather if the jokes are of the wrong kind. So if you kind of want people in character and out of character joking to alleviate the awkwardness, you don't want them joking at the expense of the horrific thing that just happened. So, for example, if someone's face blows up on stage, you don't want to look down at his body and say, I thought you were ugly a minute ago. Because as amusing as that might be, it basically takes all of the, I guess, immersion out of the game.
Sure.
But if you instead react in horror, stumble backwards, and fall into the orchestra pit, it's funny, it's slapstick, but it's also appropriate. So you can't direct it. Obviously, you can't, because if you try telling the players what is funny and what isn't, they will just revolt. But I think you can find that happy middle ground, and so far with Curseborne, I'm finding it. I'm sure it'll differ from group to group, but I have been pleasantly surprised.
Sure. It's reminding me of my last werewolf game where I had to do a creepy voice for a pain spirit. My player had to cleanse, rename, and turn into a guy in spirit for their elder challenge. And I put on this creepy, slurred voice. It's all body horror. And he just has to take a moment in the middle of the game goes, this is easily the grossest yet most awesome thing I've ever done in a game. And he just had to take his breath there to just release that valve.
It isn't that excellent, though, when a player gives you that unexpected compliment. I mean, I don't think enough people do it to their GMs. They don't say, wow, that was fantastic. I remember, I can actually remember the first time that happened. That kind of thing happened in one of my games. And it was way back when, of course, and I was running D&D, as one does, and it was a scene where, so Forgotten Realms game, party discover the cult of the dragon are doing something nefarious in the sewers and caves under the city of Elversalt, and they piece together that there's a ritual that can hasten the growth of a dragon. Because the cult of the dragon, of course, love to make Dracoliches, but there's no point making a baby dragon into a Dracolich. So they have developed a ritual that will basically speed up a dragon's mental and physical growth by something like 300 years, at which point they will do the Dracolich spell, because they wanted this Dracolich to burst out from under Elversalt and take the city completely by surprise. Now, the party stumble upon this, and they see the ritual and the dragon expanding, and the cultists are sort of running away, scared now. Oh no, it's out of our control. And I remember one of the players just putting his pencil down and saying, "Fucking hell," or words to that effect, or "Fuck me, this is terrible. How are we going to get out of this?" And it was that blend of in character and out of character, being stunned, I guess, astonishment, that made me feel like, yes, okay, I've actually done it. I've delivered on something.
I am a true GM now. Yeah, no,
yes, I have surprised the players in a good way.
Yes, agreed. So then I asked Danielle this, and I'd want to ask you as well, what family from each of the lineages resonates most with you? What do you like the most?
Ooh, that is a good one, because some of them are pretty awful. There is a definite design choice we made, that the families are not equally nice. I mean, they're all playable. None of them are built to be antagonists, but some of them are definitely by design less pleasant than others. And so while I can definitely see parts of myself in the Hydes, in the Shades, even the Sphinx, or the Heirs, I think they're all far too reprehensible for me to identify with them. But I would suggest I'm quite fond, I think, when it comes down to it, of the Get of Leica, which we mentioned at the beginning. I think that there is a part of them that speaks to me. It almost speaks to my politics in a way, I suppose. I like their rebellious attitude. They're not anarchs in the anarchist sense, but they are troublemakers. And I think you kind of need troublemakers in the world. You know, you need people to shake up the establishment. And I feel sympathy for their loss of control. That they resonate with me because I can identify in myself some of that same weakness. The fact that, you know, I don't always have 100% control over my emotions. Yeah, I don't hulk out. I don't tear apart the walls or bureaucrats in the city, but I do think that their protectiveness, which, if taken too far, could definitely fall on the side of abusiveness. Thankfully, I'm not that, but I can identify the traits in myself that could push me there if I wasn't aware of it. So there's lots of bits and pieces. But beyond that, I just think they're damn cool. And while I am not what I would consider damn cool, I can always aspire to be. When I was writing The Get of Leica, at the very least, I was listening to a lot of KMFDM, which is an industrial band I listened to a lot in my late teens and early 20s, and I'm sure a lot of role players did. And yeah, that rip the system kind of attitude really, it was like going back in time a little, because I hadn't really listened to much industrial rock for a while, Pig and Ministry and things like that. But yeah, that rang true for me when I was listening to KMFDM and writing The Get of Leica.
I was gonna say they're not that hip to Keir Starmer, not to get too political.
Oh, I'm sure every with a brain in their head voted Labour in the last general election. It's just no. I don't know. No, I couldn't attach a family to a specific political view naturally. I think one of the risks, and it's the same in any of our horror games, is if you take a family, a tribe, a clan, or whatever the game happens to be, and you advertise them as a group of extremes. They have extreme desires or compulsions or however you want to put it. It can get a little uncomfortable examining that through a political lens. I think every piece of media is political. I think the idea of leave politics at home, I'm just coming out here to play a game, is a little naive. I think you can, of course, play a character who is absolutely removed from modern politics, but that doesn't mean your actions aren't political within a context that the game sets up. You don't have to think about it, but to deny its existence is maybe a bit innocent of you. But yeah, when you think of the Bruja, or you think of the Get of Laika, or you think of the Carthian movement, not every single one of these characters is going to be on the, I guess, liberal side of leftism. Some are going to be extreme left. Some, I hate to imagine, are going to be on the extreme right end. But it's one of those things that you can address or choose not to. I feel like for the full colour of the setting as a story guide, it's often worthwhile exploring those more negative aspects partly to show your characters as being, well, more virtuous, if you want. That's probably the wrong word. But to show where you can fall if things get out of control. We spoke about the Get of Fenris, and while I'm not a huge fan of how they're dealt with in W5, and W5 isn't my game, it isn't how I would run or write Werewolf the Apocalypse, I appreciate some people do like it, and I can see how the build of the Get of Fenris in previous editions is, by many estimations, fascistic. You don't have to call them Nazis, but there is definitely a might makes right, we all yield to the strongest kind of attitude that is kind of inbuilt in the Get of Fenris. Now, your characters don't have to be like that. Your characters can, in fact, push against that stereotype. But I can understand why Paradox went that way when they wrote them for W5. It's not what I would have done. I wouldn't have pushed them there to become a death cult in totality. But I understand their decision, even if I don't agree with it.
Sure. If you want my opinions, you can check out the 4-hour interview with James and Josh. They have not drifted that far. I'm just nicer about expressing them because I'm out of the moment. But
the thing is, I think it's absolutely fine that the new edition of Werewolf has, well, the designers made the decisions they did, and it clearly doesn't offend absolutely everyone. There are people who are enjoying W5 as it is, and that's great.
Sure.
But the good thing is, if there are people that don't, we can always fall back on the old canard of, well, you can always play your existing editions, or we can say, look, there's another game over here that may scratch the itch, that may actually deliver the kind of things you're looking for, and that game is Curseborne, where you can be righteous in your rage without also being an asshole.
Yes, no, I agree, and that's kind of because anyone who has listened to my Werewolf game have picked up that I have made minor and major tweaks to the setting, and it's just because I can't do it out of the box, is just not in me. So I get that. So Curseborne I am watching closely because of that, because I do want that itch scratched, and I think V5 can scratch it a little bit. W5 for me, not at all. But I've also been just branching out. Like, I've always done Call of Cthulhu, but even Call of Cthulhu is getting interesting. I'd mentioned with Eddie that, because Eddie had described to wrap it all in the Curseborne wrapper, I guess, or conversation is Eddie had mentioned that Curseborne is probably closer to hope punk than
Yeah.
any kind of World of Darkness thing. And I'd mentioned to him how Call of Cthulhu is not hope punk by any stretch of the imagination, but I have noticed a trend in the more recent adventures of them trying to pull the in the grand scheme of things, this doesn't matter, but it matters now. And
Yeah.
the cultural zeitgeist kind of just not being in hopeless, wanting to their games to be hopeless like they were
Mm.
with the original World of Darkness and things like that.
But it's refreshing because I remember when Call of Cthulhu, as much as people enjoyed it, and I enjoy Call of Cthulhu, was a bit of a joke. And by that, I don't mean it was a bad game. I mean, you went to a games convention and you knew for a certainty how every Call of Cthulhu scenario was going to end. And to the point that it became a meme, pretty much. You die or you go insane.
Not
And
necessarily
that
in
was
that order.
no. And that was the meme about Call of Cthulhu games. Yep. And I think that long term served to damage the brand in a way. I'm sure it attracted some people who really wanted a bleak one shot quality, although the mechanics of the game never really lent themselves to that oddly. With a sanity pool of up to 100, it doesn't necessarily make a great deal of sense for it always to be a foregone conclusion. But the newer editions, you are quite correct. The designers of Call of Cthulhu 7th edition, the sheer number of scenarios that are coming out right now, I don't think I could run a Call of Cthulhu game following that old template anymore. I think it would just be hackneyed, if not a bit boring. And a bit of a joke. I can't imagine players would walk away these days thinking, wow, what a rush, knowing that their characters met the same inevitable demise as every previous group that played this. So it makes certain published scenarios, the classic ones, Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, which I'm running for Red Moon Roleplaying, Masks of Nyarlathotep, Horror on the Orient Express, probably 3 of the biggest ones, Beyond the Mountains of Madness. They're still classics, but they probably do need a good revision at some point to appeal to the modern Call of Cthulhu player, and it'll be interesting to see if they do that.
I do think the most modern incarnation of Masks does scratch that to some degree. It is definitely, it has a gradient of success where it goes, if you do these things, then you get this happy, like not good, but definitely happier ending. Here's where it usually falls in the middle, where it's like, and that's your story seeds for future chronicles, because you can actually continue after Masks, which it's been forever since I've read previous editions, but I don't think that was really built in. And then
no.
And then it's like, hey, if your character's just kind of fucked around and did this, that's the ending scenario. It's on you, pal. Like, so, the new Masks does do that. I do agree with Beyond the Mountains of Madness. I finally read that, and Chaosium did, with the re-release, but it's not for the new edition, it's just a reprint of the old one, is they did thankfully, renege on the greatest sin in tabletop book design, in that they went back to 2 columns instead of 3 like the classic one did. But I do remember things like one of the characters has to die at this point. If you got an NPC to survive to this point, he will do that and they'll have to murder him and be monsters. And I was like, that kind of fucking sucks.
Yeah, the thing is, when that was new, I imagine that was really quite exciting because no other games were doing it.
Sure.
I've been running the Great Pendragon campaign for a couple of my Patreon groups, and each of them has had their first encounter with Merlin. And in the Great Pendragon campaign, when you first encounter Merlin, the text basically says the player knights will either do what Merlin says, we'll do what Merlin says. If they don't, this is where their adventure ends. You can close the book now, pretty much. Okay. I mean, I get that a published adventure has to have a certain linearity to it because you don't have infinite numbers of pages to account for every decision.
Certainly.
But yeah, those days of, I guess, finality-based decisions of, yes, your one character must turn into a monster, one character must lose his mind, one character must get turned into a frog right now. It's a gimmick more than something that's playable.
Yeah, and it seems like, at least with older games, certainly there was definitely more of an antagonistic tone. If I'm going to take the words from some old D&D adventures and
Oh
from
yeah, yeah.
Beyond the Mountains of Madness specifically, because there's pages dedicated in Beyond the Mountains of Madness of going like, if your characters are refusing to go with the story, this is how you punish them. This is how you punish them, and it's just all in the first chapter. And I'm just like, did no one discuss the social contract in like the 80s, 90s? Like,
No, they
no.
didn't. And there will be people who listen who say, and it's good that they didn't. But I remember at the end of Shadows of Yog-Sothoth, you can pick up elder signs as you go through the adventure, ostensibly to protect you from various Lovecraftian or mythos creatures. And at the end, the characters may well have developed the idea that an elder sign acts like a holy symbol in D&D and will basically turn undead, except it will be for mythos creatures. And so Cthulhu, inexplicably rises at the end of Shadows of Yog-Sothoth. It's got one of the oddest end chapters, pretty disconnected to everything else. And your characters are there to witness it. And they may get in their minds that all they have to do is hold up their elder signs to push back Cthulhu. And Cthulhu will fix his baleful gaze, his favourite dance group, the baleful gaze, on the investigators, and any part of their flesh that is behind the elder sign, it remains perfectly intact. Everything else gets disintegrated. So you just end up with chunks of forearm and wrist dropping to the ground. Because the investigator, it turns out elder signs aren't all that much against an elder god or great old one. But I think that's a funny way of doing it. At least it's in the last chapter. But
yeah, over
it's
a
still
long
very
camp.
much of its time.
Yes, yes. Well, to tie it back to Curseborne again, I know that the Outcasts have kind of a Lovecraftian style family, from what I heard from Eddie. Could we get a little information on them? What kind of like outside entities? How much is it tied to the mythos? How much do you guys dance around it? Like, what are these alien entities kind of described as?
Well, in the core book, they're still, I won't say, they're not vague, they're nebulous, because we give lots of examples of adversaries in the book that could easily be attached to the mythos, such as there is a great sort of parasitic entity that lives under the city that is spitting out lava that is going on to possess people, sort of turn them into cultists. And that could very easily be something a bit Shoggoth-like. And it isn't in the outside where the outcasts come from. It is living underneath you right now. So that's something clear and present that you have to deal with. I think as we explore the outside a lot more in future books, I guess what in other games might be considered planes or other realms or other worlds or what have you, we're going to see more concrete examples of things that look mythos-like, or Fae-like, true Fae-like if you want, or even heaven and hell-like, just to demonstrate that there is a myriad of these other worlds beyond your one, and that actually gives the Outcasts lineage a lot of diversity. Because on the face of it, you could easily look at the Outcasts and say, well, you're all fallen angels, essentially. You could look at this from a Demon the Descent perspective. Or you could look at it from a Demon the Fallen perspective and say, well, you're all clearly demons that have escaped hell. Or you could look at it from a Changing the Lost perspective and say you're people that escaped Arcadia or what have you. But the fact is, they are a lot of these things and probably more, because you use the example of the mythos. They maybe even have a connection to the fact that one of the primal families is the spawn of Vodnik, and they have a very deep one aspect to them. They're not deep ones directly called out. They have their roots in Eastern Europe, because that is where the Vodnik or Vodyanoi myth comes from. But that myth is a very deep one. Like, it is a creature of the Black Lagoon kind of creature. And the idea of a sort of Father Dagon who is the patriarch of this family, expecting sacrifices to be thrown in the water to allay the curse that's on the family. These are all your maritime shifters, not just fish, but frogs and other such creatures, and hence the bulging eyes and the weird wet appearance. So I like the idea that with families like the Spawn of Vodnik, if you were to look at the Outcast family, which also has certain mythos links, much like with the Get of Laika and the Dead origin story, you can start making connections across lineages. I think in one of the families for the Primal, assuming this hasn't been edited out, we even talk about the initial individual who essentially the first Primal murders by ripping out their heart is one of the Hungry's family heads. That's what it's believed to be, that he was trying to impose various punishing laws, shall we say, on the people who eventually became the first Primal, and they listened to the voice, they listened to the creature that said, don't just take it anymore, you are not a herd, you are a pack, you can fight back against this. So that builds tension without making it explicitly vampires versus werewolves again. This is something way back in the mists of time. But I know I'm going very much off on a tangent. But that Lovecraftian element, connecting lineages, those historic elements, this is all lore that we're seeding throughout the game that I'm hoping people will start glomming onto and wanting to explore a little more in their games, or wait for books to explore it a little more.
Okay, that actually brings up a great question, because big thing that drew people to at least the World of Darkness was some of the lore and the interconnectedness. Is Curseborne going to be more interconnected? Is it going to, like the World of Darkness, is it going to be a little more discrete, like the Chronicles of Darkness, or is it going to fall somewhere in between?
I think it will be falling somewhere in between. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
The reason is we're not aiming for meta plot. I think that's clear, but we are aiming for lore. And I think there is a difference there. The idea that meta plot, maybe it's just because meta plot's taken on a bit of a bad smell in recent years. Metaplot ended up developing a reputation for nullifying character choices or forcing characters to be observers, and I don't necessarily agree with that estimation. I've always felt like the published chronicles for games like Vampire had to be written the way they were. Yes, some of them could have been improved, but if a storyteller is forcing your characters onto the sidelines, that's down to the storyteller. The game cannot account for everything your characters are going to want to do. Nevertheless, metaplot is now seen as a very rigid thing that will eventually cut off player options and introduce new options. Lore, on the other hand, is material you can explore to add to your characters. It is material that adds depth and story hooks to your games. It gives depth to people who want it, gives new resources to people who want them, and most players want new playable options. And it makes it fun to read. And I think that's a big part of it, because the one unacknowledged audience in role-playing games are the people who buy RPGs just to read them. And there are lots of them. There are lots of people who buy RPGs and never play the things. And that makes me sad in the respect that I think these are great games and there are places to play them these days. But there are some people who don't want to. There are some people who do just like reading these games and playing it through in their head. And in that regard, I think that having a good base of lore in your game is a decent way of handling it. Chronicles of Darkness 2nd Edition was very good at that, I think, and isn't praised enough for its handling of lore. Especially when you look at books like the Dark Era's books, there'll still be people who say, I don't like Chronicles of Darkness because it has no meta plot. But I think that is often a hang-up from how basically the core books core first edition books presented the game. Much as there's still people who will pull on some random thread from the 1990s World of Darkness and say, no one can play the Harbingers of Skulls because there's a sidebar that says they are all vengeance-obsessed elders. And so, well, read a book that came out after that. and
You
maybe
could
you'll change your mind.
you could truncate that to read a book for some role players.
Uh, the thing is, I'm more than happy for people to play however they want. I can't walk into their games room and tell them to play otherwise. I do sometimes get a little tired with the one true wayers who, again, it's usually a sidebar. For whatever reason, it's often sidebars. It's almost as if those little chunks of text, because of the way they're presented, stick with readers more than anything else. So, yeah, they will have read something in Clanbook Malkavian revised about a Methuselah, and that will be their takeaway for the next 20 years.
And
Um,
I think part of that's that oral tradition thing I talked about earlier, but I do think because it is presented that way, because as you're reading the book, you're gonna glaze over in certain paragraphs, right? But
mhm.
that sidebar, because it's short, it's easy. I think that sticks in, and then people kind of tune out all the contradictory information
Yeah.
in the not sidebar.
Yeah, I think people did that a lot with the Predator's Taint in Requiem First Edition. I'm fairly certain that was a sidebar, and in fact, later in the book, and I feel free to prove me wrong, listeners, that it actually says that it only triggers when the storytellers and players find it appropriate. But because it was presented there as an optional rule in a sidebar, everyone's takeaway from Requiem First Edition was vampires can't see each other without bursting into frenzy.
I'll
It was
admit,
just
I thought that for a long time too.
no, it's absolutely natural that people came to that conclusion. But yeah, it means we as game designers need to think very carefully about how we present information.
I think it's also the rightful statements like, "Hey, don't read this entire book cover to cover before you feel comfortable running it," right? And so the
Hmm.
rule comes up in game, and people just go, "That's the rule now," and it happens. That's how things get like dropped off and
Yeah,
added in,
yeah.
and they think that it was in the book because their GM either mentally made some connections or made a ruling at that time, and it
Hmm.
wasn't presented as such.
Right. Well, I am going to have to wrap up soon.
All
Did
right.
you have a final question, a big question for me, Keegan, or are
Uh,
we
I,
finished?
let's see. A big question. All right. Let's say I know that Curseborne Book 1 is getting to the 4th level of powers, and it sounds like there will be tiers of play. Do you have an
Hmm.
idea of how many tiers of play Curseborne is going to have? Is it going to be similar to Scion? Is it going to go completely wackadoo and go where we'll end up in Exalted 3rd Edition territory when the last book
Oh
comes
my
out?
goodness.
Where
Uh,
where does Curseborne where is Curseborne heading?
so right now, and this is subject to change, of course, because those books haven't been written. But our plan is 3 tiers. So like Scion, although you're not necessarily going to become gods. The idea is that ultimately you will reach Entanglement 10 characters. So we've got Entanglement 1 to 4, I think it is in the core book, and so we'll then divide up the next 6 or what have you after. But yeah, 3 tiers seems sensible. There's some parallels again between not only Scion but something like Hunter the Vigil, which we're all big fans of. The idea of going from your cells to your compacts to conspiracies. It's a very nice way of presenting your game levels that I think is very accessible to people and less granular than I'm level 1, I'm level 2, going all the way up to level 20.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you, Matthew. I really appreciate the time. Maybe next time we'll have a recording on the ethical dilemmas in tabletop role-playing games.
Oh, I look forward to that.
So, Matthew, where can folks find you if you want to be found?
They can find me on MatthewDawkins.com. They can find pretty much every book I've ever worked on MatthewDawkins.com, and I think if you buy through my website, you're likely to get a discount as well. So do that. Also, they can find me on the Onyx Path Discord and on Twitter for a while, not much longer, at Dawkins MP. But yeah, I am steadily shaving away the social mediums on which you will find me. So soon, Discord and my website will be the best routes. Oh, and YouTube, of course, at The Gentleman Gamer.
You have been more prolific recently.
I
And
have, yeah.
and I've been Keegan. You can find me on Facebook, YouTube, Podbean, but you'll never find me on Twitter because I have always found it a cesspool and I've been proven right time and time again. Thank you.